When I was a kid, I had dreams and aspirations or just a general expectation even that I was going to grow up into a man, and that didn't happen. And then for the rest of my life since then, there's been like a sense of loss around for me as a trans person being like, well, I never grew up into the man I was supposed to be, and now I'm the woman I'm not supposed to be, is how it feels a lot of the time. And so there's a lot of loss around that, grief around the invisibility and people not seeing me.
Well, hi, thanks again for entering the Gray Zone. I'm Robbie. This is the podcast where our theories are going to go to die. Our theology is going to get tested. And as always, we remember on the other side of every issue is a person whom God loves. In particular, with this issue today, I do want to address the fact that we will be talking about the trans experience. And if that's not something that you are prepared to engage with at the moment, or maybe there are people around, younger people, that you don't want listening to this conversation, just not ready for it, that's okay. You might just want to skip this one. We do get very detailed, and we just don't want to unnecessarily upset or traumatize anyone incidentally. I'm just going to talk to two wonderful people, made in God's image, whom he loves. Their names are Jesse and Taylor. And we just simply let them talk about that experience and what it's like, what it feels like to have gender dysphoria, the process of coming out, their experience in the church. It's just a honest, open, here's their story. We want to respect their stories, hold them delicately. And I just invite you to have a posture of curiosity, of compassion, of empathy. We just want to hopefully heal people who are listening, educate people who are listening, introduce nuance, as we always want to do on this podcast. And for me, I walked away from this very moved, very impacted, kind of emotional, which, if you know me personally, is kind of a big deal. So the goal is just to love and to understand and to seek God. I think we did that. I think we accomplished that. Here's my conversation. Jesse and Taylor. G'day and welcome again to the Gray Zone. Thank you for entering into this space with me. Today, I have been praying for and looking forward to for a long time a conversation that I am holding probably more delicately than I normally do because it is so important. I am welcoming some wonderful people to talk about a very important thing, and that is the experience of being a person who is trans and all the things that go along with that, or experiencing gender dysphoria. And we do not want this to be talking point, political. We want this to be human beings talking with other human beings in the most compassionate way we can, seeking understanding, as we always do on this podcast, but also making sure that we're trying our best in our frail humanity to uphold God's law and to honor what he has said is a good design for us. Welcoming then to this space, and I will shut up, I promise, are some wonderful people. I'm just going to go left to right on my screen. So welcoming Jesse White.
Hello.
And Taylor, no last name.
My last name's Douglas. I totally forgot to put it on the thing. But yeah, hi.
That's okay. You're right in line with the show. I always do something awkward or bad with someone's last name. It's usually thank you for White. I can pronounce White, so that's good. But yeah. Well, welcome to Taylor, Douglas, Jesse White. Your pronouns appropriate for you, Jesse, are they, he?
Mm-hmm.
Taylor is they, them. Robbie uses traditional, what would you say, cis male pronouns.
Yeah, he, him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the boring ones, right? The generic ones. So many directions to begin. I think where I would love to just ask you both to maybe say why you felt you even agreed to my request. Like, why did you think, or why were you hopeful to have a conversation about this? Where's your heart? What's your posture? And maybe, tell us a little bit about what you do, during the daytime hours, if you want to tell us a little bit about that. I want to start with Jesse and then over to Taylor.
Sure. Yeah, so currently I am a full-time barista and student. I've been working in the coffee industry for a decade this year, and I will be completing my master's in marriage and family counseling in the spring of this upcoming year. Um, and aside from that, I love doing outdoor activities. Well, when I'm not drowning in schoolwork, but I love doing outdoor stuff. I love just helping build community, whether that's like spending time with friends or engaging in some way with the local church. And I think for me, that also plays a lot into why I was excited to be able to have this opportunity, as well as I'm really passionate about educating the church, particularly on topics related to LGBTQ plus experience. That's been a big part of my history, of course, but also many other dear friends of mine. And one of the things that I had prayed through when I was really, really young, well before I even came out to myself, actually, was just feeling convicted about being a voice for the voiceless and using some of the ways that I've been privileged and advantaged in my own life to be able to step up and speak for those who often don't feel like they have a voice, but also to actually set up a platform for others to come behind me and continue on in that process as well.
Yeah,
You
I
go,
feel really
Taylor.
similarly as Jesse too on this. So day to day, I kind of joke that I'm a minister for hire. I just do whatever people ask me to for my church, other nonprofits, and that kind of just that arena right now. I'm also a seminary student. I'm finishing my last year of my master's of missional theology through Missional Training Center, which is a wing, I believe, or like a sister school to Calvin Theological Seminary. And the main reason why I was interested and excited to be part of this podcast was a lot of the same things Jesse said. I really think that it's important for us to hear stories, actually, of especially like maybe different marginalized groups of people or just smaller demographics of people, because relationships are just so important for us to be able to understand each other and get to know each other. And like we as trans people represent, what is it, like less than 1% of the population. So there's not a lot of us, and yet we are talked a lot about. And I think it's great in the church for people to hear our stories, even though I know Jesse would probably say this too, that ours don't represent, all trans people everywhere. We're just kind of like a little cut of that group.
That's excellent. You're both making me want to go back to school a little bit. I get excited about wanting to do that stuff.
It's a trap. Don't do it.
I know. It's definitely probably a trap because I also hate homework. I just kind of like the idea. But oh well, I'm currently reading 6 books at the moment, so it kind of feels a little bit like that. But I probably also won't finish them for another year, so I'm hopeless. A heart from each of you to see that those people who are on the margins, which you are identifying as part of you, have a real voice. I think that's really important, right? And that is a big heart of this podcast, is to try to bring voice to those people and those topics that is not just a short, hot take. We're angry about this, we're glad about this, and move on. We need to breathe and let these things breathe and actually find a way to nuance them so much that maybe we don't walk away more sure, but we do walk away more understanding, and I'm okay with that. Your personal journeys kind of with faith and gender, I think, like I was telling you guys before we came on, I've spoken to people about this topic, but not people who identify as having gender dysphoria or trans in any sort of way. And I was like, that's a good criticism, and we need to do that. So I was glad to have you guys come on for that reason. And we're going to go into a lot of just your experience in this space, your experience in that space, your experience with these people, with a family, etc. Prior to that, though, as I said, I would be really curious to learn about your personal journey, maybe if you had a story of coming out and what that looked like. from each of you, and then we'll go back to each of you and kind of go really granular and as personal as you're comfortable with of those moments that led to maybe a moment of coming out or identifying. So just to mess with you, let's go to Taylor first this time.
Awesome. Yeah. It's hard for me to separate out all of those things. So you're kind of going to get a little bit of it all at once because my faith, my gender, family, all that's very intertwined. As a child, I'll just start at the beginning. I never had, so I'm born female. I never had a concept of myself as a girl, though. And as a child, I also didn't know what trans was. I didn't grow up in, I grew up in Mesa, Arizona, where it just a generally like conservative environment, very like, I mean, just like, traditional environment, very much steeped in the church. And so I knew I saw myself as a boy and everybody else around me was disagreeing with me. And I didn't understand why that was, because this was prior to me really conceptualizing what the differences were between boys and girls. And so I just saw myself as a boy and was like, this is weird. Why is everybody like, to show how far that went, I even asked my brother to call me his brother and to use he, him pronouns for me. And this was not knowing anything about the existence of trans people. So that was most of my childhood, dressed pretty masculine as a boy. I looked like a little skater dude, I feel like. But got to around puberty, and for me as a kid, my family was very like kind of okay with me being more boyish, even though they wouldn't call me a boy. They would, because they were like, oh well, you're just a tomboy, it's just a phase. And then I got to puberty and it went from, oh, this is a phase, to now this is a problem, because they started expecting me to look and present in more feminine ways, because I was hitting like middle school, high school, those kinds of years. I think, to their credit, I think that they were a little worried about me being bullied for presenting like a boy when I wasn't biologically male. But I think also, family image, other stuff that's maybe not as wholesome was mixed in there too. But it was mostly a combination of like pressure from my family, from people I knew at church, from friends, well, I guess not friends at this point. I was trying to make friends and failed to make friends because I was like the weird kid and people didn't know what to do with me. And so between pressure and ostracization socially, I ended up conforming to like feminine gender stereotypes and stuff, and stopped calling myself a boy, at least in person. I kind of lived a double life that I can talk more about at another point. But I spent the next 10 years of my life between about age, I think, 12 to 22, masking and saying, oh, I'm just kind of like a masculine woman or things like that. Or I would joke that I'm an honorary guy or things like that, but I would look feminine outwardly. And that got me a lot more acceptance. But I think the dysphoria piece of everything, where like my gender was a source of pain, never went away through all of that. And I just found various different outlets for it, even though I had to look outwardly feminine. And then it wasn't until COVID hit in about 2020 that I started having to slow my life down enough to start to notice that all the threads of gender dysphoria and gender incongruence had been there the whole time, even as much as I was trying to shove them down and say, no, that was me as a kid. Also, I forgot to mention, by college was when I had learned the language of trans and could identify, oh, as a child, I was trans. But I would say I was trans and I'm not anymore. Even though I'm not super comfortable with being a woman, I don't think I'm trans. But then I got to COVID and having way too much time with just my own thoughts to be like, okay, all of this has been here the whole time. I've never identified as a woman. Like I've always identified as a guy or something like that, even though biologically I'm not and even haven't transitioned. But yeah, it was around that time that I started coming out to people. I had actually gotten married by this point too. It was about a year or two into my marriage. So I came out to my husband first. he took it good after we had worked through his initial fear of like, oh, are you about to transition and leave me? And I was like, no. So him first, then my pastor, who also actually took it really well when I started telling people, hey, I think I actually am trans and I need to work out what does this mean for me as a person. But yeah, I think that those are the big points in my story.
And thank you for sharing that with us. I'm already just as listening to your story going, there's a whole lot here that does not meet the common narrative that I hear in the news all the time,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, oh yes, you were preyed upon by trans people who wanted to, as a child, make sure that you had every opportunity to, go to a library and hear a drag queen read a book, right? Like, you didn't even have that language, you said, until many years later, and you were like able to retroactively go, oh, okay, that's language that
Mm-hmm.
fits the way that I was
I would
feeling.
say, yeah, I even probably had a lot of like homophobia, transphobia as a kid. And I think some of it, a lot of, I've talked to some other like queer Christians and queer individuals, and a lot of us grew up that way where we repressed it so hard in ourselves that when we see it out existing in the world, when other people are openly gay or transgender, we have like a disgust directed at them. And that we end up
Hmm.
having to kind of work through later in life. And that's something that I for sure had. If I saw trans people, I would not want to be near them, and I wouldn't resonate with them because I was repressing myself so much.
Yeah, wow. I've never heard anyone say that, but it makes perfect sense. It does. It's the thing that feels
Mm.
the most wrong about me, and it's on display in another human, and that's like, ooh, wow, okay.
Mhm.
Gosh, okay. We're processing, sorry, out loud. Thank you, Taylor. So Jesse, similar, kind of take us on your little story a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, I think similar to what Taylor said, there's several points where I would say experiences overlap. I think the biggest difference, a couple of big differences for me, um, when I was younger, I have a pretty strong memory. I remember of um, going to my sister's room, and she had like a bunch of like princess dress up stuff, and I remember that was one of the first moments where I was like putting on these outfits, and it wasn't just like dress up. It was like I I feel like something different. Um, and my experience has never been I feel like a woman or feel like like something kind of opposite of masculine. It's always been I feel like something in between. A big connecting point with my faith too is like from my earliest memories of like working through stuff related to like gender and sexuality in I would say very loose categories within my church context. Um, I I always questioned and struggled with the idea that God made us as gendered beings with um, like sexual parts and desires. And so there was a lot mixed in there with sexuality as well, which I started wrestling with also at an earlier age. Um, and it was just a lot of complex pieces. Another big part of my upbringing is I'm a pastor's kid, and we have a lot of church trauma in my family. My dad has been kicked out of 8 of the 10 churches that he's been a pastor at, and so um, a lot of my earliest memories of even facing like discrimination from the church was not just aimed at me being a queer person, but it was actually aimed at my family because my dad has always been one to challenge cultural norms and stand up for um, minorities and minority experiences. Even if he's done it imperfectly, that's always been his goal is to love people well and make sure the church is welcoming people and giving people the opportunity to come to know who Jesus is without stigma, without judgment, without fear of being kicked out. And that's precisely what happened to my family a lot. Um, I've also, I'm born and raised in the southern United States. And so there's a lot of other cultural pieces there. Similarly to Taylor, very conservative, but different than in the Midwest, where um, it's a lot of cultural Christianity, and so it's not just in church spaces; it's across the whole of society, and it's a lot of nice to your face and really brutal behind your back. And so we had a lot of discrimination and judgment cast upon our family well before I could even recognize fully what it was. We also moved around a lot when I was younger because of that, and so I think that that constant movement and back and forth, I never really had a chance to sit with a lot of my own discomfort until around puberty. And that was when I started having a lot of realizations around my sexuality first. That was the most front facing piece for me at the time. Um, but at the within that same year, so I was around 12. Within that same year, my dad, who is also in the National Guard, he was on his first deployment in Afghanistan for a year, and so we had a lot of difficulties in our family because of that. I felt a lot of pressure to step up and be kind of like the man of the house at 12 years old, which is, it was never something that was verbalized to me, but it was this unspoken expectation that I felt both in the church and in military spaces, which no 12-year-old can do that. That's not the role of a 12-year-old. It's taken me a long time to kind of work through that piece. I also met the person who would become my abuser for the next 3 years, and that was really hard, having to deal with that and not being able to tell anyone what was going on. I also was experiencing this medical condition called galactorrhea, which is where during puberty, not, or I guess the adolescent, whether male or female, begins lactating outside of what you would normally experience during, which typically during pregnancy. And so it was very painful, and it very much elevated what I now realize is my experience with dysphoria. But similar to what Taylor was saying, like I was having to do a lot of repressing, even more so because at that time there were a lot of other things happening in my family that were much higher priority to be handling and dealing with. And I really had to, I actually, this is another big memory of mine, is I remember these things would come up in my mind and I had to essentially decide split second, is this something I can focus on right now? No? Okay. It's going to the back of my mind. And it just stayed there for 7 or 8 years until I got to college. And I started working through sexuality more in college first. I'm currently at a seminary finishing up there, but I did my undergrad at a Southern Baptist seminary along with my master's, and had surprisingly good responses to working through sexuality. It actually became a really significant place of growth and healing for me in just working through that process, even with coming out. Had a very painful coming out experience with my family the first time. And then around 2020 as well, actually it was towards the beginning of 2021, my mother got diagnosed with breast cancer, and that brought back up this memory for me of experiencing galactorrhea. And I immediately was flooded with all these things related to my dysphoria that I hadn't thought about in almost 20 years. And I was realizing in that moment there, like, a lot of my experiences that I had been attributing to being gay and attributing to my experience of sexuality were actually connected with my dysphoria. And that really threw me for a spin, because it was stuff that I thought I'd kind of worked through and kind of gotten over the hump, and I was not cured by any means, but I thought, I was like, all right, yeah, I'm good. I've got this figured out. I'm solid. And then all of a sudden this new thing comes up of dysphoria, and it was really painful. It took me, that was actually, harder for me to accept than being gay. Being gay was really easy, actually, for me to accept. Um, Being trans was not. And it took me probably 4 years, really, to actually come to a place of acceptance and recognition of this being part of my experience.
Thank you, Jesse. There's yeah, I feel like I could do a whole podcast with each of you, and it'd be a week long. So thank you. There's so much in each of your stories. Can we, before we proceed, I'm thinking of the people listening. There's lots of terms that I'm still trying to nail down and understand, so that I just understand this better and do it well. So help us, each of you, and kind of chime in as you want. Can we nail down what gender is? Versus, like, you're using sexuality differently. Some people would conflate those. Your dysphoria versus trans, so let's play with some vocabulary to make sure that we're nice and clear. So let's start with, how would you maybe kind of define or explain gender?
Do you want to take that, Taylor, or me?
I mean, I wonder if we would even explain it exactly the same way, but I could give my definition, and then if you have a different one, go for it. The way
Sure.
that I've been thinking through gender is I do believe that there's a difference between gender and biological sex, to define that clearly. So biological sex has ties to the physical body, whereas gender tends to exist more in a social realm, I believe. It's the way that we live out maleness, femaleness, and for non-binary people, kind of everything in between. I don't, because I tend to be more of a binary trans person. I personally don't know how to articulate non-binary experience well, too, just to add that. But yeah, so I think about gender that way. I think there's some kind of essence to gender. I don't think it's just some social construct, personally. I've read on that, and I think there's something more to it, because it feels so intrinsic to human experience. And it's kind of like a category that we use to define so many other categories, because, like, whether you are male or female or man or woman defines a lot of other things in your life, even how you're perceived in different roles, or what roles are available to you, like whether you could be a mom or a dad, for instance. So yeah, that's one thing that I think about gender. As far as dysphoria and trans experience, gender dysphoria, the way that I articulate it, is it's the pain that comes with your gender identity not mapping onto your biological sex. So this is, I think, different than trans experience in and of itself, because for me, I'm trans all the time, but I'm not experiencing gender dysphoria all the time. For me, dysphoria comes up when my experience as being trans is causing me some kind of pain. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. And Jesse, add on to that for sure if you have anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with everything Taylor said. I think, speaking more to the non-binary side of the trans umbrella, um, there's I think some variations of how people who would fall kind of more in that category would describe themselves. I think for me personally, and from other people I've heard describe it, is it's either experiencing something that feels not quite masculine or feminine. Like, I recognize that there's ways in which I'm embodying both simultaneously, and also not doing either in a way that makes sense culturally, particularly, for example, the Southern US, which is where I currently live and have lived my whole life. Um, there's other people who've described their experience kind of more in that realm, where sometimes they feel more like a woman, sometimes they feel more like a man, sometimes they feel somewhere in between, and it just kind of depends on the day. So I think that would be more where, like, on the non-binary side versus a more binary experience with dysphoria would kind of fall into.
All very helpful, and both have used the phrase even binary, so we're even throwing jargon in there as well for those who are I'm sure most people have heard it, but maybe not had it well defined. So a binary person subscribes to the idea of just the two genders, the male and female, whether or not they agree that, maleness and femaleness are biological traits or social traits, irrelevant. They do see at least that there's one and two. Whereas as you're saying, non-binary there's this sort of spectrum that mixes and overlaps to help describe. I think it's good to point out too, as you guys, as each of you are pointing out as you talk, you're cautious in the way that you're subscribing and defining, not because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but not because you don't feel like how, but because you're trying to be sensitive of my experience is my experience, and I can't necessarily prescribe it to someone else, which is something I've seen from any people that I've heard talking about their experiences in this space. Is they're always really quick to say this is just how it happened for me, and this is how I am able to define it, because you can accidentally silence, cause harm, keep closeted a person by saying this is what it looks like, because we're working with a person, it seems, who is already confused, scared, angry, traumatized, working this out, and then to have someone who's like, I'm one of you and this is how it should look, and it's like, well, there's another person telling me that's incorrect, and so wait, am I extra confused or messed up or traumatized? So I think it's good that we kind of tease that out. This is not to create hurdles and confusion. I hear you being sensitive and therapeutic and cautious because of what you each have gone through. So I think that's just good. I'm speaking to the listener, not to you guys. I'm not, mansplaining, speaking about gender. And so like I where do I want to go next? Experiences in the church. Let's go there. And take as much or as little time as you want. I know, and I mean, I feel like it's the posture of myself being, half white, male, normal straight guy, has had pretty much the world given to me as a result, because there's not a lot of hurdles I'm needing to jump. And as a Christian, that was fine. It was like everything was kind of set up for me to win, so to speak. And the church has done the church proper overall, I think, has done a very poor job of meeting people who experience these types of things. And a poor job is a low way of putting it. I mean, there's been violence done, there's hate, there are criminal acts. So I'm not trying to act like it's, they haven't been real nice. There's a whole spectrum of evil, really, that has been done toward people who are experiencing this. I want to ask you this question, and then I promise I'm going to be quiet. I've received this language from John Eldridge, which I've found is helpful for me in my work, and helpful just in pastoring people in general, talking about the difference between a sin and a brokenness. I don't know necessarily, though, that isn't maybe harmful to hear. Whereas, a sin is an intentional, choice to disobey God's command, God's perfect design, God's will. Or if it was unintentional, when you learned about it, you realized. Whereas a brokenness isn't necessarily something that is the result of a choice or the result of an action. It's like when the disciples ask, I'm not sure if it's the disciples, but they ask about the blind man, and they say, who sinned to cause his blindness, right? Was it him or was his parents? It's like, no, it's just, he's blind. There's a brokenness to how he was supposed to see, ergo, he's blind. It's not a thing that we point a finger at. But does that feel like daggers to say this is a brokenness? Is that too, I'm asking, should I stay away from that? And you're each going to have different experiences. Again, you're not speaking for the entire trans community in the world. But out of curiosity, is that language that would be healthier, or that I should avoid? Do you have a better alternative? In these spaces in church, we're always talking about sin. We're talking about brokenness. We're talking about people need to be healed. And I promise I'm going to get to the point, and I'm going to shut up. But in churches, we tend to rush toward wanting to fix and heal the thing that we think is the most obvious. And so that's why churches feel unsafe a lot of the times for people who are experiencing these things. Sorry, Jesse, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
And so I'm just trying to lay out a lot of groundwork so you guys can just take it where you want. And
Mm.
so um, rather than seeing it as a sin that needs to be repented of immediately, is it a better posture to see, oh, this person has things that are broken and probably hurt them? And you talk about dysphoria as being that is an acute pain that I will never understand. We treat the person who's broken differently than the person that's sinful. And so I'm feeling like, is this a better posture to take towards that person? Also, and I've said this many times before, accepting the fact that maybe that brokenness will never be healed until heaven or until Christ's return. Churches don't like that. People don't like that. That's a posture I try to take. So, Jesse, I cut you off. I apologize, but let's just kind of play around with what I'm thinking, and then take it wherever you want.
Yeah, I know one other perspective that some other trans Christian friends of mine hold is one that also highlights not just the brokenness aspect or even the sin aspect, but also the beauty and the diversity that comes with every believer's different experience within their faith journey. And there's something that, like, yes, sin exists, and yes, there is brokenness um, that is just without outside of our control, and that is part of the redemption and sanctification that we go through as believers. Even to that point that you mentioned of there's some things that just aren't going to change until heaven, but also, like, we don't just live in that state of brokenness. Like, that's really painful and hopeless, and if we were to stay there all the time, um that leads to some really dark places. Being able to also understand, like, just because this is part of my experience, regardless of how I view it, like, there's so much that I and Taylor and other trans Christian friends of ours have talked about how, like, these things give us a different perspective on God, on the Trinity, on the church, that we want to share, we want to talk about with people. And it's rare that people actually want to hear that as well. Even something as simple as, like, um, a big theme that has become super important to me is the aspect of Jesus as part of the Trinity coming to earth, being an embodied human. And there's an element of dysphoria that was even existent in that process, where before he came to earth in human form, like, he was outside of the confines of humanity. He was not gendered in a specific way, as is true of the rest of the Trinity. And in choosing to do so, he constricted himself not just in human form, but actually to a specific gender as well. And yet, the way that he lived his life and ministry was in very non-masculine ways of just existing and interacting with the world around him. And connected to that, like, the aspect of getting rebirthed in heavenly bodies that don't come with the constraints that we have here on this earth, don't come with the pains. Like, we don't know what that's going to look like. Another really important aspect in a lot of trans Christian spaces is the aspect of, like, there's a name written in the book of life, and it's not specifying that it's the name we have here on earth. It's something that God has chosen for us. And the beauty of, like, being renamed into something that God has chosen for us is, like, such a significant thing that a lot of believers just don't really think about. But it's something that is a really crucial part of the trans experience. And as a trans person of faith, that becomes even more so important in the connection to my walk with the Lord and the hope that I have for what's to come.
That's beautiful. Yeah, those are some things I've never heard or thought about before. Because yeah, you're looking at God from a different side
Mhm.
than someone else is, and we need that perspective. We need that filling in our theology or presenting new and possible ideas. That's really cool. And I hear the hope. I hear there's a lot of hope in there. I don't I and you know that and I'm gonna jump on you, Taylor. I promise. There's there's not enough hope in these narratives for the Christian person experiencing trans or gender dysphoria or identifying as trans. Normally it's you know it's a narrative of discomfort and brokenness and pain and pity, but in ways it's you're talking, Jesse, you're like, I've got a foot over in heaven because that's the most hopeful place, and not because it's like get me out of here so everything's better. It's like there's this focus on your eschatology of I get to be full and whole in the perfect way that no one can say is wrong, whatever that looks like, because I'll finally be healed and complete and fully embraced. That's awesome. Yeah, beautiful. So Taylor, Jesse has mentioned, he grew up in church and he was in those spaces and it was really challenging. I don't know if you had mentioned if you grew up in faith, when you came to faith, and how did that play out at all? But would you talk kind of about your experience in church?
Yeah, for sure. So I did grow up in the church. I think my mom became a Christian shortly before I was born, so brought us into the church, me and my brother, as young kids. And I think for the most part, that was a good experience for me. But I think in a way it's because I was so young that like my boyish phase was just seen as a phase and just tomboyish, and they didn't realize there was anything else there. And I think that's kind of a privilege that I have as someone who was born female, is that I think I had it easier than some of my friends who are trans and were born male. If they wanted to look feminine, no one would let them do that. But because I was born female, people were fine with it, when I was young specifically. But yeah, I'm thinking through your last question also. I don't want to throw my whole like theology at you on everything, but basically to the conversation about
Throw it, hit me
brokenness.
in the face.
Yeah,
Come on.
let's do it. All right. So thinking through brokenness, I'm perfect. Like for me, I'm comfortable with that language as long as like it includes a lot of what Jesse was saying on the hope side too, and the positives. Like trans experience is not uniformly a negative thing. There's a lot of joy that comes with it that's unique to us. A lot of like specific perspectives that we have, even when we're thinking through who God is, who Jesus is, and that kind of stuff, and how we relate to Him in a unique way, just by virtue of our experience. But to think about the brokenness side, I think the church just needs like a reframe a little bit of how we think of brokenness. Because I think most of the time when we're talking about, oh, this person has a brokenness, we think this must now be healed. But I think in scripture scripture doesn't necessarily lead us to that conclusion 100% of the time. Like, yes, we do see experiences of healing, like the man in John 9 that you just mentioned. I actually just talked about him in my sermon, so that's so fresh in my brain. But that's one example of a person who got healed. But then I think of Paul, who asked for healing from some physical affliction over and over, and God eventually just told him, no, my power is made perfect in weakness. And so Paul began rejoicing in his weaknesses. And so for me, when I think back to like my own eschatology, when we think of brokenness, we can't return to the garden before the fall. We have to think through what is the era of history that we are in and what is God doing in our moment right now. The garden happened. The garden was good. The fall happened. Then God has been moving in the world ever since then through Israel and through the church. And the church right now, I would see Paul a little bit more in that zone of understanding scripture, where he's a model that I think about, where I'm like, yeah, when I have dysphoria and the pain side of my trans experience, I think about like, what are the unique ways that God is meeting me there and working through me there in ways that he would not be doing if I wasn't trans and didn't have dysphoria. And so I see it in terms of like the structure of gender was supposed to be that my gender and my biological sex lined up. I believe that. I know some people don't. That's my own personal beliefs. I think that was what the structure should have been if we were in the garden. But because of the fall and because it's possible for gender and biological sex to be kind of split from each other in trans experience, I think that I need to that my call as a trans person is think about what do I do with that? because God hasn't healed that in me and doesn't seem like he's going to heal that. I'm open to it if it happens, but if he doesn't do that, what do I do with this experience? How do I glorify him? How do I live out my calling to be a witness to Jesus as a trans person, and who's my audience and that kind of stuff? And I think trans experience just gives me and other trans people and trans Christians a different mission field, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so well said, because we do look at, we want to redeem other experiences, but not this one. We want to redeem the cancer journey. We want to redeem the paraplegic. We want to redeem the wounded soldier coming home and say, like, yeah, God can still, you know, they're never going to be the same, but you're right. We don't make that our norm for this experience, you know. And you're being asked in a lot of ways, if you're going to adhere to biblical and traditional orthodoxy, you're being asked to lay down maybe something that the majority of straight people would never lay down, and restrict and confine yourself in ways that are not just I'd like to and I can't, but also like it's extremely painful and strange and shifting, and it carries a whole history of hiddenness and confusion. I don't think most straight people are even ready to lay down, you know, their expression of gender and sexuality to be even just celibate. You know, which is a whole other thing that I'm interested in. I think we need to talk more about. Can we get real specific? And if as much or as little, I'm not going to push you. I'll just ask the one question. You go where you want with it. But what is a feeling? Taylor, you've talked about this. Jesse, I don't know if you experienced dysphoria as much. You haven't said it as much. But what is that feeling? Like, can you describe it in a physical sensation, a mental sensation of that moment of dysphoria, and when those moments, or they spread out through days, what that actually feels like? Could we put language around that? Is that too hard even to do?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I think again, every person's experience with dysphoria and how it even how it like comes up, how they experience it, is going to be a little different. But I think the way that it comes up for me most frequently is primarily when I am in church context, especially when it's one that I'm not familiar with. That's a big one where it's really painful and difficult for me to go into a church context, particularly one where the conversation is centering around scripture passages that are very gendered in some way, and the overarching narrative is that to be a man of God or a woman of God, you have to look and be and do things a specific way.
So may I ask? So those are some causes of it.
Yeah.
What does the pain feel like?
Yes. So the I apologize. I was trying to move that direction.
No, that's okay.
The pain, the feeling that I have, I think the way I would describe it is like wanting to crawl out of my skin. Like there is something in me that wants to like essentially like break free, like get out of this thing that is like binding me down almost. Yeah, like a pit in my stomach, welling up of emotions. Like it's there. It kind of depends on also like where I'm at with other things happening in life, because there's some days where it's just easier to manage some of those experiences than others. But I think when it's at its worst, it's really really extreme.
It sounds a little like a fight or flight sort of, but a little worse than that.
Yeah, because the like in fight or flight scenarios, like there's something usually external that's happening, or at least an internal thought process that is putting you in that space. But it's something that also, like, it's happening in my thoughts and my emotions, but it's also like this sensation in my body that, like, I want to be rid of it in some way and I can't. Um, I think the most graphic way that I've had these thoughts is particularly during puberty. I remember when I would be undressing in the bathroom or looking in the mirror, I would not want to have a like the penis, the biological sex piece that I was born with, and would have thoughts of like just wanting to cut it off and be rid of it. Um, I would do anything and everything in my power to like just avoid even interacting with some of these parts of my body that are very um, biologically evident of my sex, which to some of what Taylor was saying, like kind of should map out a little bit with experience of gender and has not for me. Um, yeah, I think that's probably the best summation that I can think of right
Yeah.
now to kind of put thoughts and words to it.
Thank you, Taylor. Would you be able to kind of describe your experience of it?
Yeah, I relate a lot with what you're saying about the wanting to crawl out of your skin feeling. I think in terms of like emotions, I guess I've been trying to think through this better. But the pain of it, for me at least, I don't know if it's true for all trans people, but it feels like a combination of like that trapped feeling that Jesse was describing, like that I want to get away from something and I can't, combined with grief and loss. Because for me, there's a lot of grief around my experience, where I'm like, I want to be perceived a certain way. I feel so invisible because anybody on the street I feel like can't really see me. And then the loss is like when I was a kid, I had dreams and aspirations or just a general expectation even that I was going to grow up into a man, and that didn't happen. And then for the rest of my life since then, there's been like a sense of loss around for me as a trans person being like, well, I never grew up into the man I was supposed to be, and now I'm the woman I'm not supposed to be, is how it feels a lot of the time. And so there's a lot of loss around that, grief around the invisibility and people not seeing me, trapped feelings. And so all of that combined is a very unbearable thing. And I can even share that when I was a kid, back before I understood what transgender people were, or even that there were elective medical procedures you could do. As a kid, I would pray every night for God to give me breast cancer so I could have a reason, because I knew about double mastectomies. I just thought you had to have cancer to get them. So I used to pray for God to give me breast cancer so that I could get rid of my breasts as a child, because I hated them so much. And so I haven't been there lately, but like I'm definitely not praying for cancer. I know a lot more about it as an adult, and that sounds horrible. But there is still like, I guess, kind of a twisted part of my brain where there's a part of me that's like, if I was ever diagnosed, I don't think I'd be upset about that part of the process, um, because I've decided not to physically transition, and so there's a part of me that's like, well, it would be nice to have some, acceptable excuse to go do some medical procedure, and yeah, and I know that when my dysphoria hits really hard, I definitely will like hyper focus on like fantasizing about, well, what if I just took hormones long enough for my voice to drop? What if I just, did a reduction or something like that? And like, I get the times I'm most uncomfortable in my skin is when my dysphoria is really, really bad.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So we've danced around this topic, but we haven't said anything yet. Stereotypes. Like I personally, I mean, again, right? Like I won the lottery, right? Straight white male. Um, Stereotypes can still do damage to me, and they can confine and create acute forms of confusion and pain for anyone. And I think in particular for folks like you guys, both of you in your story said like, no one was walking around telling me, hey, I think you might be trans. Let's go on a journey together and I'll help you. You were just like, something's wrong. And you were trying to just fumble around and understand yourself. But stereotypes, in particular in our church contexts, which we're all familiar with, can be very damaging in subtle ways that I don't think people realize. And we can say this is what men are, and this is what women are, and this is how they should behave. And I think we get that mixed up really badly. You know, if you've ever had the chance to live in different countries or cultures, you realize that the things that you thought were all men are like this or all women are like this suddenly start to get a little more gray. You know, there are things that you see in most countries, but you start to notice, oh, though that was just a cultural norm of what I thought men do. I feel like I was lucky growing up to have mom and a dad who didn't put a lot of the, you know, some of it's natural, but, you know, my dad was like, yeah, you can like opera and dance and play football. You know, he's like, that's awesome, you know, and so those things for myself, I felt that freedom of being able to, oh, okay. So the definitions by which I call myself a straight man are much more consigned to the word of scripture and to, you know, the things that I'm called to do as a person of God before a man of God, as Jesse, you pointed out, right? Like, it's not, this is a man of God and woman of God, but there are things that all people of God are to do. And then with the uniqueness of my, you know, my body and my gender, I'm going to work that out differently than my wife does. But not necessarily prescribed. So I just wanted to touch on that because stereotypes are a bit of a pet thing for me. It's like, yeah, let's not do that. Let's just tell people how to be Christians. And if they want to dance or they want to play softball or they want to, you know, go and join the National Guard, then let them. Understanding about yourself at some point, you kind of realized, okay, something's different. And obviously that was a journey. You both grew up in church communities, and in conservative sort of Christian spaces. Did you get mad at God? Did you get sad with God? Do you have bouts of that? There's a lot of bad language out there and bad theology about how, you know, well, God created me this way, so it must be right. I can't imagine what that experience felt like. So I thought I'd just kind of let you take the mic a little and talk about, like, how did understanding this about yourself, accepting or not, you know, wherever you were in the journey, affect your literal relationship with God as a person, not just scripture, not the church, but you and he. What did that look like?
I could start this time. So funny enough, I would say my relationship with God was at its worst when I looked the most like my biological sex during those 10 years where I was telling everybody that I had overcome gender dysphoria and being trans. And so for me, it's because even the reason I had started presenting in a more feminine way was because I was like, oh, this is how you get acceptance in the world. And so I had this warped understanding of what love and acceptance was, which was conformity, saying you must conform to a certain way of life, a certain standard. And in order to receive love, acceptance, and approval. And that translated to God to me. And so it gave me, like, I would say, a moralistic view of God, I guess, in my own life, saying I have to achieve in order to be acceptable in the eyes of God. And then that translated not just to me, but in how I viewed other people. And I was incredibly judgmental of other people who didn't look like they were meeting the standards that I thought you had to meet in order to be a Christian or in order to just be a good person in the world. And so the demographics of people I would even associate with was really restricted. If I looked down on different people for whatever reason, I wouldn't associate with them because I had a very appearance-based understanding of just people. And then coming out as trans, it honestly like blew the dam open for how vast God's love is for people. Because at that point, I went and wrestled with gender and faith, specifically around 2020. I was like, how does this work when I'm supposed to be a Christian? How can this be true for me? God wouldn't, like, how can I even be accepted by God? And I remember I read a book that my pastor had recommended called Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. And that one was phenomenal as a reference or resource for me to be like, wow, Jesus's love for humans and for people and even the non-human creation is just so much bigger than what I had believed. And I feel like even though I had grown up a Christian my whole life, I didn't know who Jesus was until that time. And then I was rereading like the Gospels of like John and Mark and those books. And I was just so taken aback by it. And that outpouring of love over me then has allowed me to go and love others far better than I ever did before. Like meeting them with so much more curiosity and openness than I did before, when I had these preconceived judgments about who they were and what they were doing in their free time. And yeah, even it's grown my vision to see Jesus in other people, Christian and non-Christian alike, as image bearers of God, just seeing the qualities that they have that just look like Jesus to me. And it's made me love people so much more, and in turn love God so much more. It's like this whole cycle. So ironically, being trans has deepened my relationship with God, I think, more than any other factor of my life ever has.
Yeah, I would second that. I think I mentioned earlier my process of coming out to myself and to a few other people slowly as trans started around 2021, and that time frame was really rough. There was a big convergence of a rapid succession of really hard circumstances that all came about at the same time that I was dealing with, not just related to um, me working out being trans internally, but also things related to community and church and some other really significant losses that I was wrestling through, as well as like I had not really processed through the reality of having church trauma. I had not acknowledged that that was what I had experienced and what my family had experienced growing up. Because all of my college years were spent working through my sexuality and a lot of other painful things related to that area. And so the last 4 years have been working through a lot of things related to my faith and connection to being trans and community. Um, and I got pretty angry. I similar to Taylor, I when I was younger, very Pharisaical in how I lived out my faith. I had a very specific view of what being a Christian looked like, and God kind of, in a lot of ways, whipped that out of me during my undergrad, and I'm very thankful for that. He's super gracious, and I feel like a lot of the slow ways that he has been growing and challenging me, even just in expanding my heart to love other people and see other people the way that he views them. What was really hard was when it came to myself. The biggest thing that I have always struggled with is perfection and believing, whether it's been conscious or not, believing at various points that I have to achieve this level of perfection in order to be good enough to come to the throne room of God. And that's just not true. And I know that, but there's times where my the weight of brokenness or dysphoria or pain. I also deal a lot with depression. That's been another big theme for me. And so even my depression, like the lies that I hear from that, become so weighty that I can't see past that to what God sees. And I was really struggling early on with a lot of really dark thoughts related to being trans and being a Christian. And I remember seeking help at my last church, and for one reason or another, just kind of never got it. Um, Left me in a really dark place. I became very isolated, and very suicidal during that time frame too. Just with how separated I felt from God because I believed that I could not be in His presence, because my experience did not match up with my biological sex. Um, and uh, Yet, even at the worst points of that, and this has been true in other points of my life, I've never been able to actually get to the point of even taking my own life because there's something in me that I think has always like held me back. A lot of that I would attribute to just conviction, but also the work of the Holy Spirit of like holding me steady in ways that I can't explain other than just God's presence. Um, I have a very strong memory during that time frame of I was talking to my therapist and I described what I was feeling at the point was felt like a wounded animal trapped in the corner of a room. Um, and one of the big things with any wounded creature is because of their wounded state, they won't let anything or anyone near them because they're so much in pain and so afraid. And there's often a lot of lashing out, even if you're trying to provide care. And I think that's what I was doing to people around me is people perfectly or imperfectly were trying to provide care in some way, and I was lashing out. But I remember I described that image to my therapist, and then a few months later, had the same image come to my mind as I was listening to a podcast. But this time it was expanded out, and I saw um, this figure that I felt like was God sitting in the other corner of the room, and wasn't trying to come near me, wasn't trying to like force anything or beckon me, was just sitting there, and I had the sense of he was just waiting for me to come to him um, for for care. And it took me a while to get to that point, but as I worked through that and was actually able to go to the Lord and give this part of my life to him and let him see all of me, um, it's really completely changed my understanding of myself and my own faith and um, my connection to the church and to the people around me. Um, I think the person I am today is much stronger in my faith, partially because I've just gone through a lot and I've had to experience a lot of some of my worst fears as well. But also I've been able to see, like Taylor was saying, like the expansiveness of God's love that's beyond constraints that I would put on it or other people would put on it. I've been able to see a glimpse of what his love can and does do for us and in us and through us.
Beautiful. I was going to ask each of you to kind of share a word of hope and encouragement, and Jesse, that you just did. Absolutely. Taylor, any words of hope, encouragement for those listening?
Yeah. I think for anybody who is listening who knows somebody who's trans in their life, they're not beyond the reach of God's love. I think that that's just something that our culture likes to say about trans people is that we're so messed up that there's no hope for us. But that's not true. Trans people are just as interesting and special as everybody else. And so I would just encourage you to just, if you're not in relationship with them, to just continue in relationship with them and engage with curiosity, seeking ways that God is already moving in their life rather than feeling like you have to build something from scratch. Because you never know who is God is going to reach out to if he hasn't already. And if they are a Christian, asking already about just about their life experience in genuine curiosity, not with any expectations, and or even also even asking permission to ask questions can be good. Another one of my friends, trans friends, has pointed out before, because not everyone's always in the headspace to answer questions. But yeah, I think that's what I would offer there. And then if there's any trans people who happen to find this, you are loved by God. I love you, and I think that if you, no matter where you are on your journey, God is walking with you in it, and He wants what's best for you, and He's just right, like a prayer away, if you ever need somebody to process the complexities of trans experience with.
Amen to that. Thank you so much. I want to I'll gather from you guys when we're finished, from each of you, information on maybe good websites to direct them to. You mentioned some books, just anything that would help people continue this education on their own, as well as are there good phone numbers to call if people are feeling suicidal ideation and they need to feel safe, and maybe even church communities and places that you've found it's like this is a place that is safe for you to work these things out in a healthy, godly environment. So we want to just load this up with all that. I hope I could invite you to come and join me again, Jesse and Taylor, at some time in the future, and we continue this on, because I could, like I said, I could stay here all day, because I just feel like it's healing me, just learning more and learning, okay, I can do a little bit better and understand a little bit more, to love people who need it as much as I do. So I'm going to pray for us and we'll head out. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Well, to the one true God, the one who made us and who does not make mistakes, we thank you for helping us to engage with things that don't make sense to us, but do make sense to you, things that you will work together at the end of all things when you perfect and renew and restore and redeem all of your creation. Help us to have a posture of love and humility and curiosity, and above all, service to the people who come across our paths who need to find you and find in you the answers that they're looking for. Help this world be more compassionate, and help us be a part of the work that you're doing to do just that. May God come at the right time, but we look to the heavens, hoping that it's soon. In all things, we trust you. Help us to hold this earth as well as we can while it's in our hands. In the name of Jesus, amen.